This shit
sucks. And you never saw that. What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny. You may know me from my social media accounts as your artist warrior. And today we're going to be talking about metals. How do we draw metals? So if you look at a piece of metal, what exactly are you looking at? Okay, so for example, you hold a metal sphere, right? So if you hold a metal sphere and you look at it, you will notice that if you look closely, what makes that sphere look like metal is a combination of gray. It's multiple different tones of gray. So all of those colors together, when you arrange them in a very specific way, your eye will perceive that as metal. So we're gonna switch to my notebook here in a second. I'm gonna try to break this down for you as simple as I can. If you have any suggestions, any requests, anything that you would like me to go over later in a different video, please drop it down in the comment box, or just reach out to me on one of my social media accounts. It's your artist warrior all across everything. So that makes it easier for you to find me. Before we switch over to notebook, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I have a lot more content coming up for you guys, and you'll also be helping my channel grow. And the more my channel grows, the better I get at making these videos. This is my second video, so I absolutely suck at it, but I'm trying my best, y'all. Y'all gonna have to bear with me here. Let's get to it. So like I said before, metal is a combination of these colors arranged in very specific ways. So if we look at this reference picture, I went ahead and finished that sketch of the upper arm portion of this armor, and we're just gonna go ahead and fill this in with color. So I got my gray tones. Don't worry too much about which specific pencils you want to pick out for. Just make sure that you have a light gray tone. White is definitely very important because we really need to get those reflections in there. White is very important to make sure that we get that really nice metallic effect. Get the darkest grays that you can find. Most definitely black. Some of these portions we're gonna have to mix black in with the grays to get that dark gray tone, and then get some gray mid-tones. And we're gonna go ahead and start. The sketch looks pretty simple, but I'm gonna fill all the details in with color. Oh, it looks pretty lame right now because there's nothing filled in. Once you put the color in, you're gonna see the difference at the very end. So let's go ahead and get this done. I'm gonna be time-lapsing some of the process, and I'm gonna be breaking down some of the process to you also as we move forward, so that way you can get the technique just right. We're gonna start trying to map out where those dark tones are at. Okay, so we're working with white paper. I'm gonna make a video later on the difference between working with toned paper and working with white paper. When you're working with white paper, you have to preserve the whites. Once you color in where it's supposed to be white, it's very hard to get that white. Even if you go ahead and use an eraser and try to get that same white value in, you're not gonna get that white back. So we have to be very careful with that. The whites, like I said, are very important to give the metallic look. Those reflections have to be placed in the right spot. So when I look at the reference, I can see where the whites are at. So the armor is pretty much a cylinder, and we have like the darkest tones here in the middle. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my dark gray. Get a dark gray, but not the darkest that you have. You can always add dark on top when you're working with color pencils. It's just hard for you to get the light spots back. I'll make sure that my pencil is very sharp. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get these darker values in there. Oops, my headphones are like falling on top of the paper. Damn. Actually, matter of fact, let's just go ahead and darken when we need to darken. So notice that on the ridge of the armor right here is light. So you want to be very attentive to those details if you want to get that same exact effect of what you're looking at. This little ridge right here remains white. So we're going to go ahead and map out where those dark tones are at. And you want to start filling in the color little by little. You want to try to get all the little bits of the tooth of the paper that you can. This paper that I'm working with right now is a colored pencil Strathmore paper. So, and you can see that it's not completely smooth. So we want to get the pigment as far in that tooth of the paper as possible, but we do not want to put too much pressure on the paper, so that way we don't compromise the blending that we need to do later. So we're just gonna slowly fill in these dark areas, and I'll go ahead and skip this process. All right, so now that we got that middle dark stripe in there, that's the darkest tone in this section of the armor. So I want you guys to notice that the armor goes from this tone straight into white. You see how bright that white is? So that's the white that we need to preserve. But in order for it to blend really well, we're gonna have to get rid of this line right there. So the line, if you really look at it in the reference picture, the line is not that sharp. Okay, like it's slightly blended in with that white. And so the way that we do that, first of all, make sure that your pencil is nice and sharp. Like I said, we need to get deep in the tooth of that paper. We don't have to put pressure yet, but we need to get in there. So we're gonna break this line by going lightly right beside it with even lighter pressure. So that way when the white blends on top of it, it uses that little bit of pigment and it gives it a blending effect. So we're just gonna go very lightly on top of this line just to break it off. All the way through. And at the very end, we're gonna do this on the right side as well, because we also have a very light stripe of white color coming right on this side. We're gonna go ahead and lightly put that layer in there. So when we put pressure on this area, just remember that the ends of it needs to be very light still. So we're gonna start putting a lot more pressure on this area right here where we blend this area, because we want to have that really nice pop, right? So we're gonna put a lot more pressure on this, and we're just gonna burnish this entire area right here with one of the color values. Okay, so now that we have that out the way, we're gonna go ahead and try to fill out the far sides of the armor. So we have the white patch, and then we have that gray tone right in this area, and we have pretty much the same gray tone on the right side as well. So if you're unsure that the gray value that you have doesn't match the tone that you see on your reference, go ahead and use it on the side. Like just color a little bit on the side and see if that gray that you picked out matches what you have in your reference picture. It just makes it easier for you, so that way you're not guessing when you're putting that color in there. You're not gonna accidentally put the wrong color in, and then you're gonna have to do more work to try to fix it. So we have the value that we want, or the value that I want in this case. We're gonna go ahead and preserve that white. Same exact thing that we did with the gray. We're gonna map out that section right there. And we're gonna color in with this gray value. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip this process. All right, so we have our colors mapped out. We have our dark tone, we have our mid-tones, and then we have our whites, which is the very light tone that we have on this picture. So in order to make this look really good, this is the part where we have to be very attentive to detail. If we see on the reference picture, we have very dark lines at the bottom of these ridges going across the armor piece, right? And basically what that's telling you is that these pieces are overlapping. For those of you that are just beginning in art, shadows means an overlap, right? You know, it only makes sense. And so we just have to be very attentive to that if we want to get that exact effect. And this serves a purpose for pretty much anything that you want to draw metallic. Even if you're drawing something of your own and you're not looking at any reference, it's just one of those basic principles that you have to keep in mind. If something is supposed to be overlapping on top of, you know, another piece, there's going to be a shadow in there somewhere. And so at the same time, we look on this side of the reference picture, you see that this overlapping piece of the armor right here, the shoulder pad, casts a shadow right there in the middle. So this is a darker tone. So you can use a darker gray to come in here and replicate that. All you need is a little arrow. Keep in mind of that ridge that we need to keep light. and we just add that shadow in there. So those black lines that go under the armor, they are literally black. So you can go ahead and use your black pencil and get under those. Just pay attention to the reference picture to see where exactly you need to place the black. For example, on this side right here, this piece of the armor is casting a shadow like this, right? It's like a little shape from the tip of the armor right there to where the shadow is landing. So I'm gonna go ahead and add those black lines in there. Make sure that we get this right. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. We just have to keep the principles. If we keep the principles, it's still going to look good. It's still going to look metallic. It doesn't have to be exactly like the armor you're looking at. It's just the fundamentals that we're worried about. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those blacks in there. All right, so there we go. We have pretty much all the details we need for right now. So we can start putting a little bit more pressure onto the paper. We're trying to blend these colors that we already put down, or the base colors, out as much as we can. So the way that I do this, and it has worked for me for a long time now, is that I pick a color that is a little bit lighter than the color that I put down. Those two colors are going to blend and is going to give you another value, but of that same color. So in the case that you need to darken it up a little bit more, you still can. Like I said, I would rather go lighter than go dark and not being able to reverse the work and not having the result that you want. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use a lot of color to blend these base colors out, and we're gonna see what that gets us. So it's the same principle. We're just gonna go ahead and sharpen our pencils. Sharpen the pencils really well, trying to get in that tooth of the paper. So I like to use circular motions to try to get that color in there. You can see how the colors start blending out really nicely. So just by looking at it, I already know that I'm gonna have to darken this up a little bit more. It's not coming out the same tone that I see in the reference picture. Alright, since I already know it's not gonna come out exactly the way I wanted it to come out, I can go ahead and darken it up a little bit more. Just get the next darkest value and just layer on top of that layer. So I mean, if you're gonna work with color pencils, you gotta understand that this is very time consuming. So you just have to trust the process and just go over and over again. There are a lot of layers that you can use, especially if you have the right paper. I'm gonna make a video later about the different kinds of paper that we can use and how to work on them. I like to work on tone paper too. I think it's very useful because here we have to preserve the white. On tone paper, you have to add the white. It just looks more like what we're looking for. Yeah. Okay, so now is the fun part. Now we get to go in and put in that white color. Blend these edges out pretty well. That should give a nice metallic effect. Also making sure that we go over with the white on these little ridges like we talked about earlier. Those are very important for that metallic effect. All the details that you see on the reference picture, if you get them right, it's definitely going to give that metallic effect we're looking for. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start slowly on the edges and then move inwards. And after we're done with this part, we can add those final details in. All right, so we got that edge. Now we're gonna move inwards. This is the point where you put a good amount of pressure on the pencil, really trying to make that pigment settle on there. Now that we refined all the colors, we can go in and focus on the tiny little detail that makes this piece look realistic. We can start by looking at the under ridges. For example, this little corner right here, we'll see that we have a dark gray coming out of there from the overlap. So we can make that little shape. And since this gray is darker than the layer that's under, you can just go in with a darker pencil and color that in. All right, we got that pretty good. So if you look even deeper into it, part of that little spot is dark black. It's not just gray. So right into that curve right there is black. So we can go in and burnish that black in there. We can go and fill in these little details with the black. Really give that deep shadow effect. One thing that I notice about metals is that when the tone changes on the metal, on the grays, or even if you're working with gold, I'll make a separate video for gold. But when you're working with metals, the tone change is pretty sharp. Like maybe there is like a little bit of blending on the edges, but it's a sudden change of value. It goes from very light to very dark very quickly. And so you don't have to worry about blending all that much. You do have to know where to blend it though. So here on this side, this little area is a bit darker. So we can even use the black pencil lightly. Go in there, darken this up a little bit, then come back in with a darker gray and blend that out. And that dark patch comes all the way down to the second layer right here. So color that in. Now we get a darker gray. And go in there and blend this out. Okay, that's still not as dark as I like to go with. So let's go a little bit darker. Make sure the pencil is sharp. Go back in there. There we go, that's a little bit better. On this particular area, the blending is pretty smooth. I can still see a little bit of the line coming up on here, but it's not as sharp as from this value to white. So I can get a lighter gray and toss it on top. And if I want to smooth this gray out with the white and get a even lighter value of gray and color in the edge. So anytime you pass a different color on top of black, you want to go back in there and darken that up. So I get my black color pencil again, and I'm really pushing in that line to get the effect that we want. better. Now we're gonna go back in and darken all the blacks that we colored over. There's some of the black on this area that I passed over with the white. Then we're gonna do something cool at the end. So now you guys can see how these little tiny details, they make a huge difference when it comes to having that nice shiny metallic effect because of the sudden change of tones like I talked about before. These little black lines under the ridges, they just like change the entire look of the picture. And so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna make this metal pop. So I already colored the background gray, and if you want to make anything pop, you need to have either the opposite or a completely different color. So what I'm gonna do is darken the background around this area right here where I've colored in, and that should make this middle portion pop, since the tones on my edges of the drawing are pretty light. If I darken these up, this is gonna pop out. Check this out. All right, and there you have it. We have a nice piece of armor, fully colored in, fully metallic, nice and shiny. All the details that we needed to perceive this as metal, and the dark background gives a pop effect. So it looks like it's just popping right out of the paper. Obviously, this is not a very thorough background since I was just trying to do this really fast. This is pretty much it.